everybody, just want to let you know it's our first time doing this a webinar via Zoom, and so far it's going great. And I want to thank Amy for joining us for this exciting program. And Amy, you don't need to hear anything more from me. I'm going to turn off my camera so you won't be able to hear or see me until later. And it says the sound is muffled. Okay, well, hopefully Amy's not muffled. So please keep letting us know if you're participating, keep giving us feedback. So Amy, thank you so much, and take it away.
Thanks so much for having me come to the Kankakee Library tonight. I was looking forward to doing this one. My name is Amy Alessio, and I was a librarian for 20 years at the Schaumburg Township Library. It's about it's northwest suburb of Chicago. And I was the teen and adult readers advisory librarian there. Now I teach librarians at a university. I teach young adult literature and collection management. But I have been obsessed with vintage cookbooks for a long time, and I've been giving talks for the past 11 some years on some of my favorite wacky recipes. I like to make fun of the recipes in kind of a nostalgic way, but that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy eating them. And this is one of my all-time favorites. People always ask me how I got into this. Like Vicki and I were talking about that before the show started. And this is the earliest recipe I can remember making. I was fascinated with my mom's joys of JellO, and I wanted to make this one, which probably some of you have made. This is broken glass. It's got a number of different names, and I've made it in all three versions. I was fascinated by the lady fingers that line the pie pan. I didn't know what lady fingers were. I remember I was like 8 or 9, and my mom said I could try making any one of these. This one was a heck of a lot of work. I'll tell you, it's like 4 different types of JellO, and you have to make them like in a jelly roll pan, something flat, and then you cut the little cubes, and then you mix it up with the Cool Whip, the filling and the flavored filling, which I think was black cherry in those days. This is from the 70s. And then I made that pie, which is good. A strange combination of flavors. I think this works best in either the cake form there or the JellO film. The big form, the tall form, which you don't see as much anymore because they're impossible to get the JellOs out of them, right? Most of the time you see a 9x13 that has JellO in it, and the people serve themselves from the pan. So that is a sample of the type of things that I'll be talking about tonight. But I'm going to go back quite a bit earlier than the 70s, and I'm going to tell you about my collection as well, my vintage cookbooks. So I have 1,500 vintage cookbooks, and that has been weeded down. They are encased in 4 bookshelves now. I had to think because I've recently cleaned out and moved some around. A lot of them are pamphlet styles, and I have about 30 boxes of people's handwritten recipes that I have picked up at various sources. But why I started collecting, in addition to my obsession with JellO, which seems to run in my whole family, these are both of my grandmothers did not leave much in the way of recipes. They didn't write much down. And both of them were immigrants and wonderful cooks and could sew and make and do anything. But they just didn't write the recipes down. So I wanted to remember the types of things they cook and the memories I had of eating with them. And I didn't have written record. I'll tell you about some of their recipes when we get to that. I have a few, and my cousins have a few. But so on the left is my grandma Curtin, who is an immigrant from Ireland. And I think she made that particular outfit that was at the wedding of my godmother's, and could make and bake and cook anything, but she had to work full time. And they lived on the west side of Chicago, and she and her husband both worked, and they had 3 girls. She worked in the Brock's Candy Factory on the 3 to 11 shift, which was not easy, but she would make dinners ahead of time, and it was big on the slow cooker. So I remember a lot of different holiday meals where she made amazing things, though. And then on the right is my grandma Alessio, and that is a picture of my wedding. I kept my name when I got married. Immigrant from Ireland, Italy. Sorry, I'm mixing it up. And another one who didn't write anything down. And I always say that she taught me that bad food is still good memories. Now she turned 89 at least 7 times that we're aware of. She just didn't want to turn 90. So every year she was 89. Her birthday was on Christmas. 89 again, none of us said anything. Now, I did look up, using the library database, I looked up I found her Ellis Island papers and everything. And I know how old she is, but it's much more fun to remember it this way. So she was much older than 89. So she would have my siblings, and some of us had spouses by that time, and my cousin and his girlfriend over, and she was still trying to make her Italian gravy when she couldn't see it all, and she had to be like 96. But you know what? It was terrible. She couldn't see. I don't know what she was putting in there, but we didn't care. I always say I would give anything to have it even in that bad version now, because I don't have her anymore. So that's what I mean by bad foods are still good memories. So some of the things I'm going to talk about today are bad foods. And I'm going to talk about some wonderful foods. And I sent recipes to Vicky that she can email you, I think, or make them, put them available with the video of this for tonight that goes with some of these. But some of the foods, it's more that we have a nostalgic, nice memory of than the actual taste of them. And I do mean spam. And we'll get to that. All right. So foods that will win the war. We're going to go way back. So here we have wheatless day menus, meatless day menus, and not that far off from today, right? With the vegetarian, but we knew they were conserving. And I believe this is World War II. I'm starting with World War II. Yes, I do give talks on World War I and foods too, and sometimes I mix this up. But the World War II, food was a much bigger crisis in that one. A big part of the world was starving. People here were making victory gardens. They wanted to extend everything, and there was rationing. And these were some of the menus that were discussed, and the government was pushing pamphlets, and I have found there's websites at universities where you can get these whole pamphlets. Just you can find all these recipes and these menus. Well, let's take a look at the meatless day menu. So look at lunch: Welsh harebits, rare bits, hot tea, fruit muffin, and lettuce salad. That sounds kind of lean, and it was probably pretty good. They probably did not have a whole lot. And so look at dinner. Macaroni and cheese was huge. Kraft was really smart, and they made a rationing coupon for macaroni and cheese. So that box of Kraft macaroni and cheese has been popular all the way back till then. And so you can see that my mom always says that they didn't even realize they were poor, during the Depression time. And she said they struggled for sure, but her mom was able to make things work, and people did. And they said it was the greatest crime in Christendom to waste food. Food, it was so important. Lots of people starving. They were trying to figure out how to make things last here. And there was a saying and they were said that food will win the war. And this is some of the propaganda from the Food Administration. They said that Americans were notorious wasters of food. And they did not want anyone to waste food. And so they said people in Europe must need something to eat. So they advertised people to stop wasting the food, eat less, waste nothing. A little different from the ads of today, right? A little more, there was desperate times. And I know that ad is fuzzy, but so this was called the Liberty Sandwich. Today we know it as the Fluffernutter, and that goes all the way back, and it's another one of those. There were a couple different companies that claimed that they invented the Fluffernutter, which is why I put the snowflake marshmallow cream one there too. So marshmallow cream was invented in the early 20th century and from a gentleman in Massachusetts, and at the same time, a couple in also Massachusetts invented snowflake marshmallow cream in 1913. And now during World War I, Emma Curtis, who invented the snowflake cream, we're looking at her label there, published a recipe for the Liberty Sandwich, which consisted of peanut butter and snowflake marshmallow cream on oat or barley bread. Why do you think she called it that? Well, because it didn't use that much ingredients, and it used things that they might have at hand. And so then they published it in this little promotional booklet. And then there were sugar shortages during World War I, and that hurt sales of the marshmallow cream. So he sold his recipe. The gentleman for the snowflake marshmallow cream sold his recipe to Durkee and Moore, who own it today. They still they still do the marshmallow fluff. And so they renamed it Toot Sweet Marshmallow Fluff. I'm so glad they've not retained that whole thing. And so then the word fluffernutter became popular in 1960, which is how they started advertising the sandwich. Now, I've met people of all ages who like the fluffernutter. I am not a fan, but I know many people are, and it goes all the way back. So it is now a registered trademark of Durkee Mower, so they're still around, and they print recipes. And they've sued other companies as recently as 2006 for using their fluffernutter term. So, be careful how you use it if you like those. All right, this is from one of my cookbooks. It says recipes from the Roaring Twenties, and they call this one flapper pudding because it says it's so easy a flapper could make it, which I think is hilarious. It's not easy. It takes 8 egg whites and it has to rise. Nothing in my house rises because there is always somebody tramping through the kitchen. Remember the days where you couldn't step hard and things would fall? Mostly in ovens now that doesn't happen, but it does in my house. And it might be my fault, or it might be the fault of the 2 large teen boys that I have in my home, or my husband. So we've got the Roaring Twenties, and from foodtimeline.org, which is one of my favorite sites. It tells you what brands came out each decade, what recipes were popular. It said, who has time for baking? Uh, the devil gets out of the kitchen and into the jazz age. Americans crave pre-packaged convenience in the form of raw nuts and candy bars, including Baby Ruth, O. Henry, Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, Butterfinger, and Mr. Goodbar. Other things that came around in the 20s were Girl Scout cookies, Velveeta, which shows up over and over again in my vintage cookbooks, all my church cookbooks. People love Velveeta. Um, Drumsticks, and from the late 20s, we've got 7-Up, Twizzlers, and this is from, like I said, one of my cookbooks, and it said so easy the flapper could make it. It looks good though, doesn't it? It's like a cheesecake with cherries on top and a crumb topping. It does look good. But I don't do anything with 8 egg whites. I used to try to make angel food cake and stuff, but there are perfectly good mixes for that kind of thing. People always think I'm a good cook because I give these talks. I'm not skilled. I am adventurous. That's how I like to put it. I once ran into somebody who had been to one of my programs. I usually do these live and I serve treats to go with them. But when I do them live, I ran into somebody who had seen me. I think I was at Joann's or something. And she said, "Oh, honey, my friends and I are still laughing about your salmon mousse." I said, "Yes. I have had some terrible failures, and I like talking about them at programs because we've all had them. I used to do programs with recipe scrapbooking too, and I would say, um, all your family is still talking about those food failures. So, you don't want to try to have a scrapbook of all the things that turned out perfectly that you made, all the holidays where the food turned out perfectly. No one remembers those. They might remember a good time, but what they're going to remember is the year that everything failed and you had to have some awesome substitution that people ended up liking better, and then you had to include it anyway. Not everybody has those nice memories, of course, of the holidays and things. So you know, talk about your favorite recipes and start making some of your own traditions with some of these, even though their origins might be from the past. So here we have brownies, and there is some doubt about where these were invented. And, for a librarian, I hate it when there's like 3 different stories. I want the actual truth. But there are, and this shows up with other recipes too, like pecan pie, is you will have home cooks experimenting, and maybe some people will be trying new ingredients or something, and people will come up with something similar at the same time, and then it'll go to the bigger cookbooks, and then it'll be established. So the Palmer House in Chicago in 1892 supposedly published the first brownie recipe, but then Sears Roebuck said they did in 1897. And the Boston Daily Globe also published something called Banger Brownies at the same time, which was thought to have been a recipe for cake that left out the flour, which in the baking powder, which seems like something I would do. So the people said that is how brownies were invented. We've got all kinds of different brownies, if you weren't aware. And these again are in the 1920s that they really became popular. So there's fudgy brownies, which purists claim have a minimum of flour and no leavening, such as baking powder. And you melt the butter rather than cream it. Or cake-like brownies, which you can imagine are bigger and fluffier and less dense. And then there's chewy ones that have an extra egg. And then my favorites are the blondies, which are like butterscotch bars made with brown sugar, butter, and eggs. Who knew there were so many different versions of brownies? And I mentioned the Girl Scout cookies from 1922. I don't know if you've had a chance to get your Girl Scout cookies for this year, if that's something that interests you. I saw recently that there was a Girl Scout chapter that was from kids in homeless shelters in New York City, and they were selling cookies in New York. I thought that was awesome. They were selling some online too, and that was amazing. So Girl Scout cookies had their earliest beginnings in the kitchens and ovens of our Girl Scout members. I got this from their website, with moms volunteering as technical advisors. The sale of cookies as a way to finance troop activities began in 1917, 5 years after Juliette Gordon Low started Girl Scouting in the United States. So here's the recipe that was published in like their Girl Scout magazine. You can see it here. This looks pretty good. Um, and it said the approximate cost of ingredients for 6 to 7 dozen was 26 to 36 cents. I don't think you could get an egg now for 26 to 36 cents. However, this is a good sugar cookie recipe, and we all have our favorites of the Girl Scout cookies. In my family, it's the Samoa, the coconut one, that has changed names a few times. We still love it, but it's fun to think about that those were invented way back then. And look at it, she looks like Little Red Riding Hood delivering them there. No one would dare do that now, of course, and not even with the COVID. You wouldn't want to go door to door like that. We get ours. One of my friends was selling her daughters on Facebook. That is my favorite way of finding them, or like if they're outside selling them. So 1930s, we will move on from my Girl Scout memories. 1930s, we're moving into the Great Depression. People are going into semi-instant baking because people have less time or people have to work, like my grandmother. And here is Toll House. Now that cookbook is not from the 1930s, but it is the Toll House Inn cookbook. And she invented the, where is her, I've got her name. Mrs. Wakefield invented them. She was liked to experiment with her cooking. She was a very good cook. She chopped up a candy bar and put it in her cookies, and people loved it. She and her husband ran a traveling inn, and so then they came up with the Toll House cookies, which are still named that, which is amazing. That recipe is still as popular as the original. The one on the package is pretty close to the original. Another dessert popular from and coming out of Great Depression times, and this one always mystifies me, is the mock apple pie. And this is going to be in your recipe packet. There are no apples, and it is made with Ritz crackers as a filling. And I've had many people at my programs tell me these are fantastic. Some kind of make do recipe someone came up at one point, although I really can't imagine that thought process. Like, oh my gosh, we can't get our hands on any apples right now. We have way too many Ritz crackers because they were around back then. Why don't we grind them up, stick them in the pie, and see if it tastes like apples? I mean, how did they come up with this? But it works. I don't know if you ever had, it's like Ritz crackers. It's got like melted butter and cinnamon and things over it. And then you put the crust on it. People say it tastes like apple pie. I find that hard to believe. I have had people at my shows who've done it with the Cheez-Its crackers too and say it's very good. Definitely a fun thing to try. If you like trying different things with baking, that might be a good one. This is depression cake. My mom has attended many of these programs with me, and she wanted me to make the depression cake that her mother made. So I got a recipe from one of my cookbooks. I tried it. She's like, no, that's not right. And then so I tried different variations of it. What we figured out is it's what people called the cakes that they made out of pretty much everything that was left in their pantry. So I've seen many different versions of this one. It's kind of like a soda bread, only it doesn't rise because it didn't have all those ingredients. I've seen versions where coffee has been the liquid. I've seen apple juice, applesauce, a little bit of shortening, lots of raisins and prunes because those were cheap and easy to get and sweetened the recipes and were good in breads. They help make it moist. So all kinds of versions. We'll see different versions of this through time called war cake, one egg cake, and my favorite, somebody referred to it as eggless, milkless, butterless cake. Yum, that sounds delicious. But this really is good. Oh no, I have the hiccups. I hope that doesn't last. If I keep water with me. You see this during lots of lean times in our country where people made this very simple cake, not just our country, you see it in lots of places during lean times where they made these cakes out of whatever was handy, and they called this one depression cake. Now that's more, try looking it up. You'll come up with like 10 different recipes, and many of them are quite good. Another popular thing from this time was refrigerator cake. There's my St. Patrick's Day version on the bottom left. This is really easy to do if you like making, this is really rich though. And what they did in the upper left corner is they stacked graham crackers on their side. They used like pie filling in the middle. They put whipped cream over the whole thing and froze it overnight. And then you can slice it like a cake because it's hard. But my version is, and my 57-year-old brother still calls it mushy cookie pudding, which is what he called it when my grandma and my mom made it. What you want to do is take a JellO pudding, and I use a little bit less milk than it calls for, maybe like half a cup. I take less milk because it makes it a lot thicker. And then you layer it, and I use a bread pan because it's pretty, this is going to be very rich. I layer it with mint Oreos at this time of year, but you can also use like vanilla wafers. And then some of you, I think, are chiming in that you've done this, or graham crackers, and they will soften overnight. I put it in the fridge, and then you can, it's like a striated, delicious cake. So it's big hit with my families. I have made red, white, and blue versions. They're not as good. The mint Oreo one is my favorite though, because they soften. And then next to it, you can see other versions where people stack the frosting and the cookies, and they slice them. Okay, from Depression era, there's a book called Cooking with Clara. She had a YouTube channel for years before she passed away. Her name was Clara Canuccieri. She's from a big Italian family. She lived in Chicago. She worked at the Hostess factory and made Twinkies all day, but her family was so poor that on her way home, she would pick weeds for their dinner and wash them. And I remember my mom hearing this story and was like, oh, I love dandelion salad. See, her family had to do it too. So Clara's grandson published her recipes, and I bet your library has the Cooking with Clara. And so she said that some of the ways her family stretched everything is they put potatoes and everything, or pasta and peas, and still was one of her favorite dishes all the way up until she died. She just had nice memories of her family sitting around the table enjoying this, even though, they may have had it quite frequently. Another meal stretcher from Depression era. This is bunny salad. We're getting into that season now. And this one looks a little scary. I don't, maybe you do something different with the eyes, but you can decorate a pear to look like a bunny in several different ways. The ears out of almonds are kind of cute. And so that might be something that different ages would enjoy. And it's how they stretched food and made it more appealing. And of course, I talked about mac and cheese and how Kraft was so smart that they made it one of the rationing coupons. And so people had mac and cheese, but this is also from that same era. This is a Horn and Hard Art. And these were restaurants where people would actually be back there cooking, even though they look like vending machines, but you order it like a vending machine. So they were popular more on the East Coast. And so you would put in your coins, and then you would be able to take whatever the item was there. And they had all kinds of things. And there's cookbooks at the libraries from Horn and Hard Art. And people would, it was fairly reasonable. So even during that time, they would be able to get a couple items. There were a couple of these left on the East Coast. I wonder if COVID has put the end of that. But one of their favorite things was mac and cheese. A lot of people have nice memories of the mac and cheese. I think it goes back to that time when it was one of the things that was easier to get for families. As we move into the 40s, we see M&M's. The government asked Mars to make a candy bar for the soldiers to boost morale. And this is what they came up with. And if in fact it could be so well preserved now in that form, tells you what that probably tastes like. And there are YouTube channels of people who go back and eat. They like find meal rations from the different wars or these desserts, and they eat them. And that, get a different hobby in my mind. But so this is the Hershey's Ration D bar. During Vietnam War, there was a tropical D bar, which actually they said was much tastier. One of the soldiers referred to this one as Hitler's secret weapon. It was hard. It was hard to chew. Somebody said it tasted, the requirements for it. The government told the candy company it had to resist melting. It had to taste a little better than a boiled potato. That could be anything. So you get to understand very clearly why M&Ms became so popular after the war. People could have them over there. They didn't melt. They were portable. It was like a quick sugar boost. And so then the soldiers came back here and they were hoping to have M&Ms over in this country too. Yeah, that the ration D bar, I can't even imagine. And here's a picture of what one of the rationing coupons look like. And as I told you, the Kraft had one for, and people would trade them to get enough sugar together to make a birthday cake for special occasions or things like that. And so these are, I've listed here many of the things that were rationed. It's hard to, I used to say it shows that it's impossible to imagine, but we all saw toilet paper being sort of rationed in the past year. Not as bad as these folks had to go through, thank God, but in the wartime. But you couldn't get your hands on certain things. I can't imagine not being able to get cheese or coffee or some of these things, but they didn't. And this by March of 1943, meat, cheese, fats, canned fish, canned milk, and processed foods. Things were like gasoline were rationed. You could use blue points for some things and red points for other, and there was supply and demand. It's pretty tough. It is very hard to imagine planning a meal for a big family with something like this. And a popular recipe that came from that era was chipped beef on toast. I'm not going to use the other name for it. And I run into people from my programs all the time that think this was delicious and have nice memories of it from that time. I'm pretty sure the soldiers do not have nice memories of it, if any are still around or if they've told stories about it. But chipped beef on toast is a popular one. People still like to eat this one. You see it, I see it in all kinds of versions in cookbooks. And you can see the derivative of it was chipped beef on toast. So you do this like bacon on toast or different versions of it. I have a teen cookbook from the 1950s that suggests that teens make this for dinner parties. And I always think that's cute. So this was something you could make easily with the rationing coupons and also something they were serving to the military folks. You think, all right, well, this talk is supposed to be good food and trends. Yeah, there will be some here, but some of these foods are delicious. Just this is where some of the origin of some of the ones that we eat now came from. All right, here's on the left is girls from the Jane Addams High School working on their 200 by 400 foot victory garden in Portland, Oregon, May of 1943. And on the right is a pamphlet from the University of Illinois Extension. On their website, they used to have, you could still access some of these recipe booklets. They were encouraging anybody who was still at home to turn land into a garden and farm it. And so vegetables for us, as well as sending other places. From Hungry History, it says, as a result of the combined efforts of the Victory Gardens, 3 million new garden plots were planted in 1917, and more than 5.2 million were cultivated in 1918, which generated an estimated 1.5 million quarts of canned fruits and vegetables. People still maintained them after the war, not as much, but they still kept up with their gardens, a lot of it. Now, I know a lot of people who planted gardens when we were all at home last spring. I don't know if you did. My 12-year-old likes to plant. He's involved with 4-H and he plants. And I showed him a picture of all these girls digging up their school lawn. And he thought that was pretty funny. I have seen library gardens. So by 1944, Victory Gardens were responsible for producing 40% of all vegetables grown in the US. More than 1 million tons were grown in Victory Gardens. So it wasn't just the growing of the gardens, it was also the canning that was very popular. And there were like cooperative canning centers. Here we go. And it was considered patriotic to grow the foods and can them and save them. You were helping with the effort because we knew that lots of people were starving in other countries where the war was taking place. The people weren't around to farm. They were starving. So I like the do's and the don'ts charts that very clearly tells you how to safely can. Luckily, we have better tools now and easier. I mean, you still have to be careful and get that seal right. But so they had the government came out with pamphlets during this time called Eating for Victory. And it was food rationing and the politics of domesticity, victory gardening and canning. And it told you how to can at home or use one of the community canning centers where they would have the right tools and the material, the supplies you would need to can the items from your victory garden so they wouldn't go to waste. But the food that most people think of from World War II is this one. do not like spam. And I've been to the Spam Museum. I don't know how many of you have been to the Spam Museum. My older teen says he still needs therapy because I've taken him not only to the Spam Museum, but the JellO Museum in New York. But so we went to the Spam Museum. It's like about an hour outside of Minneapolis. And it was amazing. This company is quite fascinating, actually. They had a bugle and drum corps that made of ladies. The spam girls was one of their terms. They had a better term, which is I'm not pulling to mind now, Hormel something, but they hired girls to entertain people and give these shows. And then, of course, they advertised the spam too. So, but where spam was really doing a good job was Hawaii and Europe, where it was saving the people who were starving, which is it's hard to imagine, right? All the different ways people could cook it. And at the museum, they have like about 100 different flavors of it, and they have new ones they try out. I like the low sodium spam. There was turkey spam. I came home with a jar of teriyaki spam. I mean, it was amazing. There's still spam cooking contests. And what I run into at my programs a lot are people who remember older folks and their families making things from spam and how good it was. Maybe they had to use it. Maybe they didn't have other options. But what some of these folks remember is how the food was good, and so that I think is the memory more than the taste. Because I don't know if you've tasted spam recently. I know some people love it. Look at the lower right. There's a spam spread, which happily is no longer available. So spam, right? I can't. I've seen spam sushi recipes where people like wrap it up in layers or they roll it. People, you go to the website for Hormel. It's just amazing what people are coming up with. Um, the Hormel Girls. That's what it was. You'd think I'd remember that one. The Hormel Girls, and there were more than 100 million pounds of spam shipped to the Allied troops. And one of their ads said, "No one likes gray meat." So uh, it's hard to imagine that ad selling. Um, those of you who've made spam with delicious ingredients, feel free to comment on that in the chat. I don't know if I'll believe you. Here's wheat checks. And wheat checks on the, here's an original photo of it being served in the party mix. So somebody, and I found this on eBay of all places, a picture of this box. Someone still had the box in their cabinet. No one was eating it. No one was eating the wheat checks, but so they found this recipe for party mix. Now, Chex cereal had been around since 1888. And then by 1952, the first recipes for Chex party mix were shown. And it was in 1985 they started bagging it and selling it. And that's the version a lot of us know. But people made it. And then in the vintage cookbooks, there's like a proliferation of cereal mixes. There's like I have a Kicked holiday mix and all kinds of unusual mixes that people made. So this originally was made in 1955 from the wife of a Ralston executive in St. Louis at a holiday function. Now notice how it's being served there on in the picture. That it was fancy. And the idea was that it was a popular TV mix, snacks which could be consumed without interrupting television watching. How many people eat it out of the bag? We've taken it to a new level of ease and convenience. I'm not even going to touch that one. So I have cookbooks going back 1950. People were experimenting with cereal. And I like to call it the cereal genre. All of a sudden you see like all kinds of things made out of cereal, including like fried chicken ground up on the outside of cereal of like you see the cereal ground up on the outside of the chicken. I see tons of cereal recipes. Some of them are quite good. I mean, there's a reason that many of these trends were popular, right? Even if sometimes they were taken to extreme. A lot of times in the vintage cookbooks, I say sometimes they were just filling up space. They were trying to capitalize on trends that were popular with people, like the sandwich loaf, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But then they'd go crazy and they'd put like lobster in it and things because they thought that's what people wanted. This still goes on today. If you're waiting in line at the grocery store, how many recipes for Greek yogurt are in front of you on all those different magazines? For a while there, you couldn't go anywhere without seeing a Greek yogurt recipe. I mean, they were trying to all be clever. So here we have, I'm going to jump back to the 1950s, and this is from my teen time cooking with carnation. Before the 50s, there weren't really teenagers. And what I mean by that is they were young and then they were adults and they were working. Or sadly, in that case, in the 40s, they went off to war and many of them didn't come back. But in the 50s, those who did come back, there was a big push of marketing towards suburban people. People were suddenly had more time. They were having barbecues. They were home as families again. Maybe they had a little more money. And so suddenly now there's a group of young people who are allowed to go all the way through high school. They don't have to go to the farms or the factories as earlier. They don't have to go off to war. So now we have teenagers and they might have after school jobs and be able to spend. So I have a few of teen time cooking things, and this one's from Carnation, which is the condensed milk. Um, and some of the recipes in there are hilarious. And this is the one that has the dinner party with the chipped beef on toast. But I like her recipe for 5-minute fudge. Nothing doing this weekend? Well, it happens sometimes. But instead of being a sad Susie, why not get the girls together? Who knows? One of them just may have a brother or a cousin who's dying to meet someone new. And whether it's a snack, a supper, or lunch, try serving one of the specialties. Before the 50s, people made fudge by standing over a stove and stirring for half an hour. I don't know if you've ever made it that way. It's very obvious to me why it's so expensive at Door County or Lake Geneva or places like that. It's really hard to make. My grandma had a recipe for it, my grandma Curtin. It was one of the few handwritten recipes she left. So I tried making her traditional fudge, but I stepped away. I went to do laundry or something, and I came back and the candy thermometer had melted down into my pot. So that was not I was not going to be able to make that again. And of course, I threw that all out. But suddenly people realized you could make 5-minute fudge with marshmallow fluff, or there's a carnation version, different condensed milk. And suddenly it's a whole lot easier to make fudge. And notice marshmallow fluff is calling it never failed chocolate fudge, which is a pretty good, it's better than Fluffernutter for a term, right? But never fail chocolate fudge. So very easy to make. If you haven't made 5-minute fudge before, it's easy, it's fast. We see a lot of these time saving recipes. Oh, I saved it. I included it in your show tonight. So enjoy. This is the picture that went with the recipe for chipped beef on toast. And it said teens should be their most attractive and pleasant selves during this dinner party. Those dresses are gorgeous. I mean, if we saw those at a vintage store now, we'd be amazed, right? I usually wear vintage clothing when I do these presentations too. And not like that, though. No one would want to see that. That's the first thing. And secondly, I don't know that I could find those. And third, I wouldn't serve chipped beef on toast at a dinner party. But I do think it's pretty funny that they think that's what teens can do. My teens are better cooks than I am, quite often, and they're quite savvy. But it's funny. So they marketed that, and I like the boy in the tie too. Other things that became popular during this time were casseroles everywhere, all kinds of casserole cookbooks. Um, for some reason, I find a lot of them that have bread cut in half and turned on its side. So the points are sticking out, and you find them sticking out in a wheel, and you also find them sticking out above the casserole. And the one on the left there, this is from 1958, Good Housekeeping's Casseroles. That is on the left, they called it Sandwich Casserolette. So it used 4 eggs, 1 quart of milk. Obviously, we're way beyond rationing now. Salt, mustard, white bread slices, sausages, or bologna. I don't know that you can substitute sausage and bologna intermittently, but they were trying it. 2 tomatoes and grated cheese. And so you put this together and you set the toast points in it and bake it. Um, it's a lot of work for no good reason, right? Make your casserole, serve it with toast, done. Then look at the one on the right. The orange slices alternating with what looks like Canadian bacon and beans on the top of it. I don't think we'd see anything like that on a cover of a cookbook now, but that was considered popular. There was also a casserole called a man's casserole, which was made with 4 cups of noodles, 4 whole onions. I was like, okay. 2 tablespoons of butter, 2 pounds of ground beef. Yeah, that's really all we need to know about that one. There's nothing good in that one, and I don't know why it's made for men. If I was going to make something around here called the men's casserole, it would be bacon and more bacon in my house. That would bring them out. I wouldn't even need a casserole pan. So Frosted meatloaf was another big favorite. And you think, Amy, this class is supposed to be fun trends. Well, these are funny. And there are some things in here that work well and still taste good. So frosted meatloaf, there was a big push to have things that look like a cake. So this is meatloaf that had whipped potatoes over the top of it. And then cooked. I have never been able to pull this off without getting the meat is raw in the middle. So make your meatloaf, serve your mashed potatoes on the side, or if you have to frost it, do it when it's done. Um, I'm not sure why that was appealing. And then they would slice it. And look on the right. Can you imagine having that as the cover of a cookbook now? No, that's from 1958. And it also suggests the frosted meatloaf that you could cover it with Velveeta. No, thank you. All right, sandwich loaf. I promised I'd talk about it. This isn't even the traditional shape. Those of you who are familiar with sandwich loaf, and a lot of people have nice memories of it. And I always say it's because it's not a funeral food, right? We serve it at wedding showers, or I don't serve it, but some people serve it at wedding showers, bridal showers. It's a loaf of bread cooked the opposite way or cut the opposite way than you think of, like horizontally. And then they would put things like chicken salad or egg salad in it. And then you cover the whole thing with like an inch of cream cheese. Um, and then you slice it like a cake and you decorate the outside. Here's a fancy one. This is from Foodorama Party Book 1959. It was given out with people who bought the Foodorama refrigerators. It suggested having things like ham and celery filling or curried egg filling. It was trying to get creative with it. And they used food coloring in that, and I don't think that's necessary. It's kind of cute how they did it with a round loaf. And you'd be surprised at where the uh, sandwich loaf shows up. The red checked Betty Crocker or Better Homes and Gardens kids cookbook that a lot of people collect. There's a version from the 50s that teaches kids how to make their own sandwich loaves. Uh, it's just funny. The 18th Pillsbury Bake Off, the winner was made something that they called Oriental Shrimp Roll. It was a round sandwich loaf and it looked like it had pink frosting on the outside, but it was like cream cheese flavored with something called shrimp juice. And this is a sign of the times. It's something a little bit different. And then as we move on, then everything became Hawaiian. Just like everything was spam for a while there, everything became Hawaiian. Hawaii joined the States. Every cookbook wanted Hawaiian cooking. And I put that in quotes because no one did research. It was like a secret code in my cookbooks. If it says tropical, I'll know it had macadamia nuts. Hawaiian often meant it threw pineapple on top. And sadly, I'm not even kidding. It's not like nice traditional recipes for poi. Of all things, one of my farm journal cookbooks, I love the farm journal cookbooks if you're a collector. It had a how to have a roast pig luau on an Indiana farm in the winter. It had like this oddly specific thing, and it said farms are great for luau's. You can dig your pit. You already have a pig. You can gather people. So that is closer to Hawaiian than some of the things I'm going to tell you about here. And I'll talk about the one on the right first because it's one of my all-time favorites to make fun of from vintage cookbooks. 1974, this is fish sticks Polynesian. Okay, there's nothing Hawaiian about this recipe, okay? Nothing Polynesian at all. I just think it's hilarious that they tried to make it look like a volcano with fish sticks and curled up carrot sticks. And it says it's a good use for leftover rice. There's no good use for leftover rice. It doesn't taste good. It gets hard, made fresh. But I do think it's really cute how they have the carrot curls on there. So that was a version of a Hawaiian recipe. And on the left, I think that was from Better Homes and Gardens holiday foods, actually. I think that had how to make your own home luau. But on the left is from Duncan Hines' 1979 Bake Shop in a Book, Pineapple Upside Down Cake. Pineapple Upside Down Cake has been around for ages. It's really cool. They now have pans where you can set the pineapple rings right in there, but of course you don't need that. This one has been popular for decades, but you do see it a lot in the late 60s and early 70s because people thought it was Hawaiian. I have it in recipes as early as 1953, where people also made apple upside down cake. I mean, there's different versions of it that are just as good. I've made an apricot one that turned out well. And sadly, they also suggest making a prune one, which I did not do. We also see from mid-century, we see soda fountains, and that was popular, and people would go to the drugstores and sit down at the counter and have it. I always think of Back to the Future with that for some reason. So I have all kinds of amazing cookbooks with unusual ice cream drinks. Look at those ones on the left. I mean, wouldn't you love to be served one of those? And imagine what you would pay at a bar for something like that. And a lot of them are non-alcoholic too. And they also suggest having your own ice cream sundae bar at home. And this is where I deviate from the vintage cookbooks. They suggest things like minted pineapple, or uh, they just have very odd flavor combinations. Remember, they were trying to become unusual, something that people hadn't seen before. And obviously, we're not going to be making a buffet of anything right now during these times, but certainly you could, even for a small group, have make your own. We used to do this a lot for the teen programs at the library, and it didn't matter what the teen program was. It's like outdoor scavenger hunt, ice cream bar. We do trivia game, ice cream bar. It was like one of the most popular things because it was easy and fast. And by fast, I mean they would go through the line in about 2 seconds. And we had rules like we were the only ones who could dispense the whipped cream. But it is fun to have your own ice cream sundae bar. And I like how it's served there with the little vintage cookies in the dishware. They have Blu-ray dishes in that particular photo. So I have a lot of fun ice cream treats, but this is one that isn't in any of my cookbooks, and it's really popular. Anyone from the South Siders here? This is Atomic Cake, of course, named after, it was a sign of the times. This is from the 60s, and the drills that people were having, and a lot of interest in space. And this marvel, and I actually found it at some of you folks, it might be closer to Kankakee. I found it at a Downers Grove bakery, and I went there and I thought, who's eating this? It's like 12 layers. I saw three people come in and get whole cakes of it during lunchtime, and this was like on a Tuesday. So what this is a layer of banana or yellow cake, a layer of chocolate cake, a layer of white cake, one or two fresh bananas, strawberries. So each layer has like pudding and fruit in between two layers of cake. And you see some of those layers have whipped cream in between them too. So I've seen people want this as their wedding cake. Type in atomic cake and you will find a rabid internet following of people who want this. So vanilla pudding, banana pudding. I think you could do this different seasons. Why couldn't you do this with like pumpkin and apple flavors at different times a year? And they serve this at that Downers Grove Bakery, had like 6-inch ones because this thing is so tall, and they have to wrap it in a plastic thing to hold it together. Uh, it's amazing, and there's no way to get all those flavors on your fork even, but somehow the pudding and cake layers work really well together. So if you haven't had atomic cake, I highly recommend it. Or maybe you could try to make one. So pudding and fruit, and then different cake layers, and then whipped cream because it needs whipped cream after all that. Here are some space recipes that maybe didn't work out as well as atomic cake. On the left, we have space food sticks in the 60s. They were designed to, quote, uh, be eaten through the space helmet. No, no, and you see the drawing of the little dude on the left there. No one was eating these through space helmets. Very few people were eating them without the space helmets. They did not last that long. But I am always amazed that I run into people that have very fond memories of this one. Different flavors of it. But out of that same era came Pop Tarts. And so they were trying to have a breakfast food that people could eat on the go. And one of the things they did that was super smart is they realized the teenage market was their number one. And they combined their marketing with the comic strips. So you can see they did marketing with Batman, and those, like, if people still have the boxes with some of the comics on them, and those are highly collectible. So that's really how Pop Tarts, kicked it off, is they did the marketing with the comic strips. And then they started doing different flavors, and they introduced the frosting and the sprinkles. But here is one of their original flavors, which is, I believe, cherry. But they've also tried some unusual flavors. I saw things like bubble gum and stuff on their site. It's hard to imagine how that worked. And then on the right is Little Debbie, came out with their oatmeal cream pies in the 60s. And what I always makes me smile is that the founder, O.D. McKee, wanted a catchy name for his company. He didn't have a name at that point. So he named it after his 4-year-old granddaughter without asking her parents. And there he is using her to hawk cookies too in the middle. So he used her image in the name for that. And the oatmeal cream pie is still their most popular cake, and the price was 49 cents each cake, which is a little different than now. Okay, I'm sure I'm going to have comments on this one. I'll look forward to it at the end. We're getting close. So we've got, I never understood why this is popular. People, rabid following of the carrot jello. Somebody told me I just haven't lived until I've had jello that crunches. No, thank you. But a lot of people love it. So this is sunshine jello, and it had lemon or orange pineapple flavor, which they no longer have. And it had crushed pineapple in its lemon juice and carrots. And actually, those flavors do go well together. And carrots have been used in a sweetener in recipes all the way back to Depression times. But Jello was trying to define itself as something other than dessert in the 60s. So they had like Italian salad flavored Jello, tomato juice flavored Jello. I mean, think of the aspects and stuff. But this one, I think they had a winner with many people. Not with me, but with many people. I have all kinds of handwritten recipes for Jello salads in my various boxes. And there was one that was called Pink Surprise, and it had barbecue sauce and ice cubes on the salad. So they were trying to be creative and come up with new ways to do Jello. There's also meat jellos and main dish jellos, and I'm not going to scare you with those this evening. All right, cakes with surprises. So the background on here is 7-Up, and you're going to have the recipe for 7-Up. 7-Up is in just about every church cookbook I have from the 1960s. 7-Up, Fresca. I've seen Coca-Cola cake. I mean, these are good. They're light, they're moist. Meyer is a chain store that sells 7-Up cake. I've seen it at a few others. You can get it already made. I've served it at shows, but you can find it at grocery stores. But also during this time, we saw the tunnel of fudge cake. Before this time, people used the electric knife and cut out the middle of those tall 1950s cakes and put in ice cream, right? And that was delicious. It was an all-in-one. You could slice it. So this is the second place winner from the 1966 Pillsbury Bake Off. They were trying to get people to use bundt cake pans because Nordic Ware was right down the street from Pillsbury outside of Minneapolis, and they were having trouble selling their pans. So they said you had to use it in the contest. And so this person came in second place for the whole contest. She made tunnel of fudge, and it's actually a chemical reaction with something called frosting powder. Now, you can no longer make it in the original way, but if you go to the Pillsbury site, they have a substitution, a way to do it now. And they also have mini ones, like the little lava cakes. Bridge Club Fare was very popular during the 1960s. And on the left, we have the frozen fruit salad. You see fruit salad molded into a variety of shapes. And you know, I'm not making fun of this one. This is delicious. I've seen it now. My family calls it Hawaiian salad, which I'm sure is also nothing to do with Hawaii. You've seen it with like coconuts. It's a lot of times it's got Cool Whip in it. It's probably not like a healthy fruit salad, but it was popular to freeze it into forms in the 60s. Now people usually serve it in a bowl or in small cups, all kinds of different fruits and combinations. It looks like that one has apples in it, and different things to include, and marshmallows are often included. See, not exactly a healthy fruit salad, but it is good. And you also during this time see a lot of recipes for tiny little cakes, petit fours, and you can cut cakes into bridge suits. A lot of fun decorations in the vintage cookbooks. Oh, there's my salmon mousse. I did include it in this one. I don't remember that. There it is. My mother had a taste for it. She remembered making it when the Irish cousins came to visit, and it was probably the only time they came in our lives. And she had such a fond memory of it. I decided to make it for one Christmas, and I went all out. I bought the salmon mold, and I made it with lemon jello. This is from the Joys of Jello. It's salmon dill mousse, and it was terrible. It was like mayonnaise and red and pink salmon, and I had forgotten to get eyes, so I pulled out cherries or something for it. It was awful, but my brother still refers to the weird fish thing I made at Christmas. Here's the thing: is that my mom and dad loved it. They were the only ones who ate it. They sat there and ate at least a third of it, which was a lot for that particular delicacy. Um, my mom just remembered the visit with the cousins. She sat there and ate it. There it is, bad food is good memories for her. But salmon mousse is very popular. A lot of times it was served in rings at ladies' luncheons. 1976 recipes, we had the centennial. You can see an entire cookbook devoted to the centennial. I put some fun things that were advertised on here, including the red, white, and blue shakes. Um, so they had a blueberry one, but I do like what they called the firecracker ones. It was like bananas dipped in like the royal icing, and then just a cherry. And so everything was red, white, and blue that year. And from Food Timeline, it gave an idea for a picnic for 1976 at the Great American Barbecue Picnic. It said serve mint juleps, grilled chicken legs with lemon basil, steak sandwiches, flower pot salad, trash can corn, banana split firecrackers. That's what these are. Beer, lemonade, iced tea, and it's got all kinds of menus like this, which is a whole lot fancier than any picnics I remember going to. But you find those advised even now. Think of the menus that come out in like magazines or different websites that maybe are fancier than you want to do. But this was kind of fun. The red, white, and blue. My favorite recipes in late 70s and early 80s is Stripe It Rich, also called poke cake. And you use a wooden dowel rod and you poke holes in the finished cake, and then you either bake it a little more, or you spread the pudding on top, or there's versions where you bake it with the JellO in it. I've seen many different versions of this one. I'm not as fond of the fruit ones. I just don't think some of those flavor combinations work. Obviously, it's beautiful. No one can see it until it's cut. That's one thing. The pudding ones are fantastic, though, and you can tell that those are from the 1970s because of the preponderance of brown and orange. In the 70s also we had Wacky Cake, and this is again like Depression era cake. It's one egg. And yet for some reason in the 70s they advertised making it in the three wells. You usually do that with wet and dry goods when you're baking anyway, but not with three lined up like that. I usually make one hole in the middle and put all the wet ingredients. So Wacky Cake or Crazy Cake is the same thing pretty much as the one egg cake and the wartime cake. Um, I found an article on NPR and it said Wacky Cake, War Cake, Joe Cake, Crazy Cake. What's in a name? A cake by any other name would taste as sweet but would not have this cake's history. Easy one pan chocolate cake would be the right title. So at different times, and we know sometimes we're lean in the 70s for sure. Think of the gas rationing. Um, when certain things were scarce, people go back to this one egg cake, this real simple. In the 70s, they called it Wacky Cake. Also popular in the 70s were crepes and fondue. Now, I know those look disgusting. On the left, those are my crepes. But you know what? They were fabulous. They were chocolate peanut butter crepes. And yes, some of my crepes are burned on the end for sure. I was making them with my boys, and the problems with that recipe were not from them. But so you make crepes, and I rolled them around a banana, and then I made the chocolate peanut butter sauce. And I have a cookbook from the 1970 called Gourmet Internationals, The Fine Art of Fondue, Chinese Wok, and Chafing Dish Cooking. And it has a whole chapter on flaming foods, which I love. My husband won't let me try those. And I used to joke that he's not always home, but now we're always home. So I haven't been able to try any of those recently. On the right is one of the fondue recipes from that time, and this one is called Pink Squirrel, and it's made with marshmallow cream. It's got a liquor that's almond flavored in there, cream de cocoa. It's got lemon juice and then banana or strawberry dippers. And again, this is an example of people filling space in cookbooks. A lot of people like fondue for making like maybe even squares of meat, but mostly cheese and chocolate are the most popular. But this one has so many different varieties. I don't know that I'd make that one. Here's one of the flaming foods. It was very popular. Okay. Any of you make cherries jubilee, things like that? That's what that comes from. A lot of times the rum is flaming, and then they would pour it over it. There's different ways to do it. I've done cakes that have raisins soaked in rum, or a cup of liquor in the middle, and then you light that up, and sometimes it catches on the cake. Different ways to do it. Yeah, I'm actually not that good at that. You're going to want to look at a cookbook for maybe the most safe version of that. 70s, we've got Watergate, salad, and cake. A salad is kind of like that frozen one I was telling you about from the 50s. It's got marshmallows and coconut. And this one sometimes had pistachio pudding to make it green, or people would dye it green. And then there was water cake, which was also from pistachio pudding. Now, it was called these because it was served at a lot of parties during the era when everybody was talking about Watergate. I mean, what would we name some of these things now? You know, I wouldn't want to hazard a guess what we would call recent issues and recipes and name them. But pistachio pudding was new and trendy. And so then you start seeing it in some of these recipes. And that turned into Watergate cake and salad. We move into the 80s and suddenly everything is luxe and it's huge and it's big and there's all kinds of delicious, rich desserts. But also we see dirt cake came in the 80s. And a lot of times we see them in cupcakes now. People ground up Oreos to be dirt on the top and they had gummy worms in the middle. You see they used Manila um, Pepperidge Farm Milano cookies and Cool Whip ghosts. And these were precursors to cake pops. They took a 9 by 13 cake and crumbled it up with frosting and molded it into cake pops. But during this era, it is just flat there. That's what's under the base of the Oreo cookies for that graveyard cake. Something else we saw in the 80s was the Mile High Mud Pie. A lot of times that was made with alcohol and served at different restaurants. And that's where really saw people start to share a slice of something. These ginormous 80s desserts that were served. And I always cover up the spokesperson for the JellO pudding pops, even though those were very popular in the 80s. We no longer talk about the spokesperson. And you can't find the JellO pudding pops anymore. You can get the cups of JellO and the cups of pudding, but you can't get the pudding pops. Also, the Reese's Pieces. M&M turned down the movie makers for E.T. And so Reese's Pieces stepped in. I mean, do you think Reese's Pieces would even be around if it wasn't for E.T.? And also Skittles were invented in the 80s. A lot of fun foods, but maybe not so many recipes. They were huge, calorie laden, over the top kind of things. Then we go into 90s and some different trends begin. And one was the Food Network. And think of the cake competitions and the fondant creations. That one's Toy Story that we've seen come out of there. But also lots of trends. And one of the things that people talked about lava cake in some of the Food Network shows, lava cake is really tunnel of fudge from the 60s. It's just an individual version of it. I've had a lot of people say to me, "Oh, I love those 90s lava cakes." I'm like, "No, actually, they're 1960s and they're called tunnel of." There's a reason people don't ask me a lot about food things. All right, and also frozen yogurt in the 90s. We saw the first version of it, and now today it's a little bit better. It's tastier. You can get it more easily. Maybe remember there were places like TCBY and stuff, and it was so cool that you could go get frozen yogurt on a Sunday. Kolachkis have kind of had a resurgence, and these are tied to a lot of ethnicities, but a lot of different versions. These are thumbprint cookies. You see these a lot at the holidays. This is a picture from Betty Crocker's picture cookbook, and they show you different ways to fold them. So many different holiday cookies have their derivative of the kolachkis, but I've seen them make a huge comeback in recent years. I actually do a talk just on kolachkis in different versions because there are parts of the country that make pizza kolachkis, and that thumbprints are the favorite in my family. I think none of us like to roll out and fold the dough and all that. You can make the thumbprints quite easily. So many people like to make the dough in different ways with melted ice cream in it or cream cheese. A lot of people think they make the only and right way to do this, but there's lots of delicious versions. Any of you are kolachki makers in the audience? I was giving a webinar for librarians from all over the country in Canada, and some of them didn't know what kolachkis were. I was like, what? How is that even possible? And then I said, come on, thumbprints, folded cooking. They're like, oh, and they all had different names for them. So that was kind of funny. Okay, and then we move from the 90s to the thousands, and things are smaller. So we've got like dessert shooters or mini donuts or whoopie pies, but not necessarily healthier. These now have more fillings. Certainly, those dessert shooters have like a mile high whipped cream on them. And so, even though people like mini things now, and you'll get a recipe for the mini lunchbox pineapple crusties that I like to make, not necessarily healthier and leaner, but littler and more fun. And these are cake pops. And I've tried to do cake pops as a library program. They are very hard to make. I don't know if you've ever made them. The actual base is fine, but trying to mold them and chill them and dip them in the melted candy and get them decorated precisely. None of mine looked like the popular book there, the cake pops. I don't know if any of you have tried making those. We had one particular memorable. I made them with the teen board once at the Schaumburg Library, and we were in a meeting room that had no sink and no kitchen. We got moved at the last minute, which happens in busy libraries. And so we had like a microwave on a cart. So we were trying to microwave the candy melts, and the teens were supposed to melt them into like holiday trees or gingerbread men. And then they would be able to spoon the candy melt over theirs. And it was supposed to be a whole station. But what would happen is that they would eat them before they got to the dipping. So then they'd have to go to the end of the line and get the cake pops again. So cake pops are fun to try a couple times. My 13-year-old has a brain mold that he likes to make them in. He lines them with the melted candy, puts the mixture in there. It's just like JellO molds, and there's silicone, and then you can pop them out more easily. It's a lot easier than trying to dip them in something, but maybe some of you have better success than I do. So what are the trends now? So we know cupcakes and mini things were trends for a long time, but they still are. And that's a photo I have from the Good Housekeeping Cake Book 1956. Actually, some good ideas in there for cookbooks, as there are with many of the vintage cookbooks. They might not things we want to make exactly anymore, but there are some good ideas. And that particular photo says that you're supposed to make all of those for your party. And I always feel like the one that's half and half in the middle and slapped together, that the person got tired of decorating. They just kind of threw that one together. There are some awfully cute ideas in here. There's snowballs. That cherry top one's adorable. They dipped one in chocolate glaze. So I get a lot of ideas from the vintage cookbooks, as I said, even if I don't follow them exactly. And now we think about what's popular today is there's the Instapot. So what are people going to be eating 10 years from now? And I think I am ready for questions, Vicki. I notice it's been lighting up, but I can't see what they are.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I don't see any questions so far, but I have a few of my own. So as I'm asking, I want to see some other questions from our people who are listening. So I was going to ask you, I mean, so Instant Pot, I have one, love it. You know, obviously that's a trend, but I guess like, what would you say is the Salmon Mousse of today?
Oh boy.
I couldn't really think of anything.
Nothing that's like as popular, you know, and there weren't like a million cooking shows or cooking blogs to go to before. So I'm trying to think, what is something that everyone serves now? You know, and that was like served for fancy luncheons and things too. So I'm trying to think what people would serve at a fancy meal. And, you know, probably is still things like surf and turf would still be fancy, although you wouldn't make that at your own luncheon. What would be the salmon mousse? So that's an excellent question.
I guess it's almost two-part. What would be that weird? And then what's also trendy? Like I know what's hot for like what this month is that the feta cheese and cherry tomato thing that started. And I made it and it's amazing. But like, those are so fleeting, whereas like the ones you just talked about seem to last for much longer. So I mean, it's different probably because of the the age of social media. But what other trendy recipes have there been?
Well, chicken tacos. I've seen at least 2,000 versions for chicken tacos. And you wouldn't think that, but tacos have become a very popular and trendy thing and like a favorite thing of people now. And so the recipes for eating them at home have become fancier and maybe more outlandish and stuff. But, you know, if you even see what the taco places are serving now, the different layers and levels and the different things they're trying in them, it's just amazing to me that should be like a basic easy dinner, and now it's become like a gourmet thing. It's crazy.
I think you're right. I know. I mean, you got shrimp tacos, fish tacos, all sorts of different ones. And I just made a Pinterest baked taco the other day, which
It's,
and it was amazing. But
oh, I love it. What did we do before Pinterest? Well, I had my collection, but
so, gosh, no other questions? Anyone? Anyone? We got people listening.
comments about things that you made, maybe or tried, or things that I've talked about that you enjoyed. I know I hit you with a lot of foods at once, and you are going to get some recipes.
Oh yeah. So anybody who pre-registered, I already emailed you the recipes. If for some reason you didn't get those, throw your email up in here now or call the library. We're actually closed right now, but call tomorrow and I'll be able to email those to you.
What time do you close?
Well, we close at 7.
Okay.
I have to be late here for something else too. So yeah.
All right.
Good night. This is a good program. Oh, okay. So Holly asks, what is your favorite cookbook? Well, if you have like 100 of them, I think this might be hard for you to answer.
I have several that I like
Okay.
for different reasons. Anything by Jan and Michael Stern, the diner food and the Route 66 foods. I like those. I have a series, Southern Heritage, Southern Living, mostly because they read like novels. There's like tons of copy, like the history of Mardi Gras parties. I have menus for like 5 different Mardi Gras parties and all these holidays. So I like those a lot. I have certain church cookbooks that I like and use a lot. Some of the Weight Watchers ones I actually like to use myself, and even some of the vintage ones. But even I have a Depression era one that it's hard. Sometimes it's what mood I'm in also. But I also, the Betty Crocker holiday one and the Foodorama one, I tend to use those a lot in shows because their pictures are so charming and so fun. Would I want to make all of those? I don't know. So that's not a great answer, but those are, oh, and the Farm Journal ones that I talked about. Many of those are common sense and easy to do. So
What do you think of celebrity cookbooks? And do you have any favorite ones of those?
and those are not new. I have one that was like Tiki Bar Favorites of the Stars from the 60s. And it had like Vincent Price.
Oh my goodness.
Recipes. And yeah. So the celebrity ones have been around forever. And even if they're not the ones doing that, it's like the Pioneer Woman is hot now. There were ones in past decades too. Where was I? Was at my family and I were traveling to Mount Rushmore, and we stopped at an antique shop in South Dakota, and they all had pamphlet cookbooks from this woman who'd done a radio show for like 30 years. I'd never heard of her, but she had these amazing recipes. I bought several of her pamphlet things. So some of those, like the local, like the blogger, I mean, like the Pioneer Woman, some of those people grow and have fabulous recipes. Some of the stars who publish a few recipes, those maybe aren't as good unless they are huge cooks and enjoy it. But I can't think of one offhand.
Now, if somebody invites you to a dinner party, are they going to be counting on you to be bringing something very strange and unusual?
Yeah, what happens is when my writing group met in person, my romance writing group, they'd be like, "No, which thing did you bring?" And I'd always lie and point to somebody else's. And my sister, I host all the family holidays too, or at least I did before COVID. But people would be like, my sister called, "Don't make some weird vintage thing." Now, I made ketchup and honey onions for one Thanksgiving, which sounds terrible and looked worse because they were like bright red. They were so delicious. My aunt called me the next day and she's like, "Now, what were those made out of?" I'm like, "I cannot tell you. You're going to be sick." They looked terrible. They were so good. Or the grape jelly and chili sauce dip for meatballs. If you haven't had that one, you should. That's like a staple from 60s church cookbooks. And it uses a whole, I think I put a cup of grape jelly in a can of chili sauce, which I never buy chili sauce, but you put those together and heat it up in your slow cooker and put frozen. I use turkey meatballs. I serve that every Super Bowl occasion. So I can get away with some things when I go to people's homes. But yes, I do try out with unsuspecting folks.
So, let's see. Oh, what do you think is the go-to recipe for 2021? Is another question from Holly.
Boy, something at home, right? Something that some
Ugh.
home cooking thing that people would love, and probably a comfort style. I think some bread recipes now would be popular. People are loving cooking with bread, or baking bread, and I think Vicky and I were talking about that too. The go-to for 2021, I think.
She thought sourdough bread. Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Bread.
nice. Yeah, that is
I
a
think that was real trendy just a year ago, first March. I guess everyone's bananas went bad at the beginning of the COVID, and we were all making banana bread.
and home fried chicken seems to be hot now with the air
Ooh,
fryers.
ooh.
I've seen about 100 recipes cross through my email in the last week for easy home fried chicken. But see, I've got all the vintage ones where they ground up cornflakes and dip their chicken in it. And you know what? It's not bad. I've actually made that one. So home fried chicken, I think, is going to be a favorite from 2021.
I haven't tried that one. I'm going to put that one on my list.
Yeah.
Carlene also said that she's made the jelly and chili sauce for meatballs. And I was just going to say,
See?
we've done the jelly and like barbecue sauce, but I've done chili sauce. So I got to put that on my list too.
Yeah, that don't buy it otherwise.
Yeah.
Like spam. Who else has been to the Spam Museum? I can't be the only one. Now the JellO Museum,
I never made it, but
it's awesome.
and I've never had spam. So maybe I got
Oh,
taking notes. I told you earlier with my friends we do a cookbook book discussion. So maybe we skip the book on our next meeting and just do some vintage recipes like you've mentioned here.
I noticed Channel 9, Robin has started doing vintage favorite ones. And I found a few YouTube channels where people try to do some of the vintage techniques. I mean, you don't want to follow it exactly like they used to. I mean, nobody wants to use a meat grinder anymore, and with good reason. I mean, use common sense. Take some of these old favorites and update them, and certainly use less salt, because I can't get over how many of these old recipes use like even a whole teaspoon of salt,
Wow.
and there's just no need.
Well, you mentioned meat grinders. Do you have any favorite gadgets in the recent years?
I do. I have an egg slicer that's vintage and we've been pulling it out a lot. We've been making a lot of hard-boiled eggs lately. I think we're gearing up for spring here, that you can turn it 12 different ways. Why? Why did that matter? I have a cookie press that's vintage that I love too.
And do you like the Instant Pot and air fryer gadget?
I don't have an air fryer. The Instant Pot I love, and we use it mainly as a slow cooker, but I have done some of the chickens in the versions in there. I like it a lot. It's great when we're all working here and at home and the whole house smells like that. It's great. Yeah.
Carlene has another question. She wants to know if your Betty Crocker cookbooks have stayed together. Hers have fallen apart years ago, and I know that my mom's have fallen apart too. So what's your secret for taking care of your books?
Those are my favorites. The things that fall apart are the ones that have the good recipes, right?
Yes.
Or the things written in them. Those are the best. But no, I can't. I've gotten to the point where I will take pictures of some favorite recipes across different cookbooks so I can just refer to them and then I'll file them. I know that's not as romantic as having the 1950s cookbook, but it's easier for me to access that way, especially when I have 1,500 of remembering where things are.
Yeah.
How to keep them. I don't think you can. Some of those favorite ones, there's a reason they fall apart because everybody loves those. Can you maybe copy the pages that are your favorites and make sure you have things that you'll be able to have at hand? That is a good question.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Scanning or taking a picture of the page to preserve the book, especially if it's older. Or the new ones. I have a book that it's not even that old, but keep opening it to the same page and then the spine's about to bust. So all right. Any more questions? This has been great. I don't know about the rest of, because we can't hear everybody, but I sat here laughing out loud,
Oh, good.
That spam or the fish stick volcano thing.
Oh,
really kind of had me busting out. So
it's probably good. It's probably something kids like. It's unbelievable that they took perfectly good food and perverted it into some of those versions, and it still goes on. Look at the things advised for kids to get kids to eat now, and the things you might not see fish sticks Polynesian, but you'll see some weird vegetable thing.
Yeah. Well, let's end on this. I wrote something down that you said at the very beginning, which made me think of my cookbook book discussion that we do. Because I say, even if you if something didn't come out, bring it anyway, because we talk about it, you talk about what went wrong, and then there's almost always a better story for a book you don't like than one that you do. So I like that you said bad food makes good memories. You said it was grandma who said that?
Yes, or no, I said it about grandma's food.
You said it about grandma. Yes, that is perfect. I think that's great. You know, everyone remembers the story when the smoke alarm went off, or, you know, oh, we couldn't eat that, went right into the trash. So, well, thank you so much for joining us. And I really appreciate it. This was a wonderful evening. And again, for those listening, we had permission to record this, so it'll be up on our YouTube channel. If you need to refer back to any of these pictures or things, if you need to make a list for that fish sticks Polynesian, some of those things, if you need to refer to it. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you. And maybe we'll have you here in person again sometime soon, where we can make some of these treats and share.
I'd love it. Thank you so much for having me come tonight. These were amazing questions.
Good. Thank you. Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.